think we're ready. So tonight we are really honored to have here with us Olivier Roy, Professor Olivier Roy from the European University Institute. Well, first let's big round of applause. So I would assume that most of us are already very familiar with Olivier's expertise and experience, but he will let us know a little bit more about that in a minute. And tonight we're going to mostly focus on the limits of the Islamic State. And this talk is actually follows an article that was an op-ed that was published by Olivier Roy in the New York Times in the aftermath of the attack in Paris in November. So without any further ado, I will just give you, the floor. So maybe first, can you just tell us what has been your experience really on the field as a researcher, and how you managed to gain this expertise that you have today?
Well, I didn't start as a researcher or as an academic. I started as a backpacker, going through hitchhiking from Paris, which is not here, to Istanbul, Iran, Afghanistan, Kabul, in '69, so a very, very long time ago. And I traveled extensively in Afghanistan, in Iran, in Turkey, which are the three countries which I know the best. I also went to Yemen, and from Yemen to Bombay, and back to France, to Afghanistan. And I've been in almost every country in the area except, Oman. I've never been to Oman. No, I tried, but I failed for different reasons. And then in '79, when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, so it's also a long time ago, I decided not to change my habits, and to continue to go inside Afghanistan with or without the Soviets. But of course, it was a war. So I spent almost 2 years, different stages in Afghanistan during the Afghan-Soviet war of the '80s. And I traveled, almost everywhere in Afghanistan. And among a lot of things, I spent some time in Kandahar, this area here, which is now the stronghold of the Taliban. And I happened, in '84, to spend some time, in the village of Mullah Omar, the founder of the Taliban. And a lot of people I met at that time here became Taliban's leaders, Of course, once the Taliban movement took the power in Afghanistan in '96, our personal relations were not so good, We had some divergences of opinion. But, I have some experience of this kind of people. And another experience I get in Afghanistan at that time, I met, the first generation of jihadists. By jihadists, I don't mean the local mujahideen, the Afghans who were fighting the Soviets. The Afghans were fighting the Soviets because the Soviets did invade Afghanistan. So it was more a war of liberation, than an ideological or Islamic jihad or something. But from 1984, thousands of young people, mainly from the Middle East, mainly Arabs, but there was also some converts from the West, some African Americans also, Muslim African Americans, a few people from South Asia, some from Far East Asia, decided, to enter Afghanistan to fight the Soviets, but to fight this time in the name of jihad, And the organization that was sending them became Al-Qaeda. It was not Al-Qaeda until 1989. Ben Laden was at that time, he was there, he was at Peshawar in Pakistan, But he was not very known, he was a logistician. He was the guy who was in charge of organizing the travels of the young volunteers coming from Algeria, from Saudi Arabia, Libya, Iraq, Turkey, to fight in Afghanistan. So he was the guy in charge of the logistics. And the head of this organization, which was called the Office of Services, the head was Abdullah Azam. Abdullah Azam was assassinated as many people in this story, assassinated in 1989 and was replaced by bin Laden. And the story is he has been assassinated by bin Laden, but we have no proof. And so in 1989, the Soviets withdrew from Afghanistan. They withdrew from Afghanistan. And so suddenly, these thousands of young volunteers, most of them were 18, between 18 and 25, I would say they came to fight. Many of them just cut, their relations with their family, or were simply they were expelled from their own countries. The Algerians, for instance, the Iraqis couldn't go back because they would have been arrested and probably killed, as being jihadists, Islamic militants, what you want. So these thousands of guys were suddenly on the market with no more anything to do in Afghanistan. And the stroke of genius from bin Laden was to turn this organization of people who went to fight in Afghanistan into a global jihad network, to globalize what has been until now a local jihad. And for him, the enemy were the superpowers at that time, Soviet Union and the USA. They did consider that they won on Soviet Union, that Soviet Union was defeated. And it's true that in 91, Soviet Union collapsed. So they claimed victory. We won against Soviet Union. So now we go to the next, the Americans, the West, let's say, the West. They still have a sort of global vision of the West as the imperialist world. So they, in a sense, they took the same vision of the world than the radical communists before. The Americans are heading a neo-colonial kind of domination with military intervention in the Middle East, and we have to fight them. But as I said, bin Laden's decision was it's useless to fight local wars because we will never really win. We have to strike at the core of the enemy. So during the 90s, they prepared 9/11. 9/11 was clearly an objective. There was a first attack on the World Trade Centers in 93, which 3 people were killed, in New York. So it was not seen as a big thing. So, and then they decided, to go for the big thing, the attack on 9/11. Bin Laden at that time was looking, to local asylums, local places where he could be protected by local fighters, and where it would be difficult for the West to attack him. So he took this kind of asylum among the Taliban in Afghanistan. When Afghanistan was taken by the NATO forces in 2001, he left for Pakistan, where he was able to hide, in Pakistan, under the protection probably not only of the local Taliban, but also some milieux of the army, of the secret services. for years, between, let's say, 9/11, which is 2001, and the year he was killed, so 2012 or 11, he tried to repeat 9/11, to strike at the core of the West. So his organization made terrorist attack in London, in Madrid, and they tried a lot of things. Some failed, some were mixed successes. But slowly, I would say that the movement of Al-Qaeda ran a bit out of steam. They have never been able to do better than 9/11. Thanks God. They tried very hard, to do better. But the organization had, I would say, was too small. And constantly, hiding, trying to escape the attacks of drones, bombs, and so on. So they have never been able to go for the next step. And when bin Laden was killed, well, it was seen as, in fact, not only the defeat of one man, but the defeat of Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda being unable really to put a real challenge. But the consequences of 9/11 were considerable. Of course, in terms of American politics, the Patriot Act, Homeland Security, and all this change, in internal politics and security issues, etc. But as far as the Middle East is concerned, 9/11 had two consequences. The NATO intervention in Afghanistan, 2001, it's NATO, so it's not just, of course, the Americans made 90% of the troops, but it was a NATO operation. The French, the British, the Germans were part, of this operation. There was, I would say, a consensus in the West that the military intervention in Afghanistan was legitimate. For a very good reason. The guys who made 9/11 were in Afghanistan, protected by the Taliban. The Taliban refused to extradite them or even to arrest them. So there was, a legitimate, if I can say that, goal of war to attack Afghanistan, to destroy Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, and to destroy the Taliban power. This was done quite rapidly because the Taliban, in fact, were not so popular in Afghanistan, at least in the northern part of Afghanistan. Their stronghold is in the southern part, but they always have been, seen as a force of occupation in northern Afghanistan. So the Afghan war, the second Afghan war after the Soviet, so the Western war in Afghanistan, went quite well in military terms. The problem is, in political terms, it's another story. And we have never been able to set up a stable democratic government in Afghanistan. Okay. We can discuss that later, but it's not a real success, if I can say that. Then the second consequence of 9/11 is the military invasion of Iraq by President Bush in 2003. And here, it's another story, because there was no consensus, in the West about that. The French were opposed, and so there was a bitter arguments, exchanged between the French and the Americans, especially on this issue. The reason was, what was the rationale to invade Iraq? Bin Laden was not in Iraq. Saddam Hussein has no link with Al-Qaeda. He was a dictator, everybody agrees. He was a bloody dictator, everybody agrees. But he has been a bloody dictator for 25 years. And nobody said nothing. So why suddenly pick Saddam Hussein as the bad guy, of the Middle East, especially when he has nothing to do with Al-Qaeda. So the reason was that Saddam Hussein was accused by the American government to have weapons of massive destruction, and so to be a real threat. The problem is, so the Americans did invade Iraq. It went well in military terms, at least for the first year, but there was no weapon of massive destruction, which is a bit of a problem. Then what you do, when you invade a country, you won, what you do? And there were, as usual, two options. Either you leave as soon as possible, or you stay and try to establish a government which is good, which will be your ally, and so on. So that was the decision of the Bush administration. They destroyed the state of Saddam Hussein. They just dismissed the army. They sent people to home. They dismissed all the high administration, and they try to rebuild from scratch a democratic Iraq by organizing elections, by teaching democracy, teaching human rights. Hundreds of NGOs got billions of dollars, to build a democracy, a working democracy from scratch, and it didn't work. The reasons it didn't work was simply that Iraq has a history. It has a complex population, and you have a lot of domestic conflicts. And to sum up, in Iraq you have three groups. One group is the Kurds. The Kurds are living all in they are in Turkey, they are in Syria, they are in northern Iraq, they are in western Iran. Okay. The Kurds have no state. They are Muslim, but they speak an Indo-European language close to Persian, and they don't speak neither Arabic nor Turkish. No. And many Kurds, not necessarily everybody, many Kurds want to have a Kurdistan, to have their own national state. Thanks to the American intervention, they were able to establish not an independent state, but an autonomous zone here in this area. And it's still the case. So they have their own territory, their own army, their own administration, and it's one of the safest places, at least for the moment, in Iraq. And they are not interested, in participating in a government in Baghdad. They just want independence. So for the Kurds, if the situation is bad in the other part of Iraq, it's good. Because it means that there will be no strong central government that would try to regain their own territory. So they have no interest, in fact, in stabilizing Iraq. The other part of Iraq is divided between two kinds of populations. They are all Arabs, all Muslim, but you have Shias here, and here Sunnis. So I don't want to enter into details, but it's like Protestant and Catholics, to simplify. And the Shias are closer to Iran because Iran is a Shia country, while the Sunnis are closer to Saudi Arabia because it's a strongly Sunni country. And the Saddam Hussein regime was a Sunni regime. The Sunnis, in fact, are a minority. They are 20% of the whole population. And Iraq was ruled by a minority, has been ruled by a minority almost since the creation of Iraq in 1920. So when the regime of Saddam Hussein was destroyed by the Americans, the Shia took the opportunity to take the power through elections. They have a demographic majority, so it's not a problem. They were all for democracy because they were sure to have the power. They won, so now the prime minister is always a Shia. But by winning, they antagonize the Arab Sunnis here, who suddenly were expelled from power. And the Arab Sunnis revolted. They revolted first, in 2000, from 2003 to 2006. And so you had the Battle of Fallujah, which was one of the most deadly battles for the American troops at that time. Of course, the American troops were able to win, but the cost was very, very high. And so in 2006, General Petraeus understood that it's not a military issue, it's a political issue, and that you have to bring back the Sunnis in the government to find an agreement between Shias and Sunnis to have a political settlement. And if there is a political settlement, then the Sunnis will stop to fight. Most of the Sunnis agree, and they expelled, yes, because I just forget something. In the meantime, thousands of volunteers, of the Al-Qaeda people and so who were living in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and so, saw a good opportunity to go for a new jihad. So they went to Fallujah, and they fought alongside the Iraqi Sunnis against the Americans. And they were very tough warriors, fighters. So General Petraeus negotiated with the local Sunni population, who are mainly, in tribal system. We stop to attack you. We give you a share of power in Baghdad. You expel Al-Qaeda people, and it's okay. And most of the local Sunni leaders, not only they agree, but yes, they expelled the Al-Qaeda guys who went, to Jordan, to Syria, to everywhere they can go. But the Shia government in Baghdad refused, in fact, to share the power with the Sunnis. And when the Americans left, or decreased their military presence on the spot, on the field, the Shias took the opportunity to attack the Sunnis. They almost expelled them from Baghdad. What they were doing is simply, to take revenge. They considered that they have been under Sunni oppression for 50 or more than 50, for almost 1 century. So they say, we're the majority, it's our turn. We don't want to negotiate with these guys. They have to recognize that we are the winners. So the tribal notables, once again, shifted side, but what to do, And then, it's the beginning of Daesh. The former Al-Qaeda people came back to Fallujah. They stopped to call themselves Al-Qaeda. They invented the new name, Daesh. And they said to the local Sunni population, look, you have no choice. Now, the Americans and the Shias will never give you power or share your power. You have to fight not only to protect yourself, but you have to fight to regain your lost power. And what they did, and it's new, they gave a religious legitimation to this fight. They said to the Sunni local people, you are the real Muslims. The Shias are heretics. You have the right, you have the religious right to kill the Shias. So, it's both a war of nationalisms, a war of religions. It didn't start as a war of religion, but the stroke of genius of Daesh this time was to transform, these local infightings into a war of religion. The good Sunni Muslims fighting the bad Shia heretics. And Daesh won a lot of people who were with Al-Qaeda before. They attracted also a lot of young Europeans, Americans, Russians, Indians, even Chinese, who, for different reasons, and we might come back to that, decided that, well, it's good for me to do jihad. So thousands of foreign volunteers jumped, into Iraq and Syria, because in the meantime there was a civil war in Syria. So Daesh decided to enter into Syria and took, so Daesh territory now, it's something like all that. So it's both, it saddles Iraq and Syria. Both populations on both sides are Sunni Arabs, speak the same language, and feel under threat from the Shias here and the regime of Bashar al-Assad, which to a certain extent is also connected with Shiism. Okay. And the new thing, because this kind of war is not new, but the new thing is Daesh decided that they are establishing an Islamic caliphate, which means that we don't just want to have the Sunni Arabs back in power in Iraq or in Syria. From now, we want to unite all the Muslims of the world, or at least from Morocco to India, into a territorial continuity, and the starting point is here, in this place, and from here we will extend, to recreate the golden age of the time of the Prophet, or most exactly of the time of the successors of the Prophet 14 centuries ago. Okay. And so instead, of officially fighting for local reasons to regain the power for the Arab Sunnis in Baghdad and in Damascus, they constructed a narrative, a glorious narrative of we go back to the golden age, we will recreate a world, global Islamic caliphate from Morocco to India, and we will give back to the Muslims their glory. So they use, this narrative of heroism, of glory, of jihad, of course, of holy war, of course, providing to young people, narrative of heroism. Come and you will be the vanguard of the Muslim community. You will be the heroes of our age. And it's, in an extraordinary way, it struck a chord, among thousands and thousands of young people from California, as I said, to Russia, who, without most of them having been, in a Muslim country at any time, decided to join. And with these guys, which may be 15 to 30,000, we don't know exactly, they have set up a very effective military fighting force. Because these guys, they come to die. These guys, they are not, they don't care about building a new society. When they leave, and we know that because it's on Facebook, they discuss between themselves, they send SMS to each other, they chat through Skype, and so we know what they think, And when they discuss between themselves, should we go or not, when they are in Paris or in New York, they explain to their friends or to their sisters and brothers, because interesting enough, there is a sibling dimension, which is absolutely astonishing. They go by pairs, two brothers, and very often the sister will marry one of the friends of the brothers. It's very specific. I never heard, about any kind of radical movement where this dimension, both generational, the children, and the sibling dimension is so strong. It's totally, as far as I know, unheard in history. And it's here we have a connection between local events, war in Middle East, I will not say that it's traditional war, because the war between Shias and Sunnis is not a traditional thing, but conflict in the Middle East, there's been a lot of conflicts in the Middle East. And suddenly, one of these conflicts took a global dimension by rallying young people who have no stakes, no local stakes. The people who join Al-Qaeda, none of them, as far as I know, has a Syrian or an Iraqi parents or grandparents. They don't come from the area. Many of them are Muslims, but they don't come from this place. For instance, in France, Al-Qaeda recruits mainly among North African Muslims, Algerian, Moroccan, Tunisian. Second generation, all of them second generation. Almost no third generation. By first generation, I mean people who come, as an adult, who migrate as an adult. That's first generation. Second generation, the people who migrate either as children or who were born, in the host country. And third generation is the people whose grandparents migrated. And when we look at the sociology of the youth who join Al-Qaeda, Daesh in this case, Daesh, we have very interesting, very interesting characteristics. Now, first, it's a generational movement. They are all young, and younger and younger. Now, we have some people 14, 15. I'm not saying that they succeed to go. When you are 14 or 15, usually at the airport, you have some problems, especially in the USA, because usually the FBI has already checked the Facebook pages of the guys. And so when they come at the airport, there is a committee of reception, But this decrease, this in age is fascinating and bothering. It's a problem. Secondly, so as I said, at least in Europe, 2/3 of them are second generation. But there is a huge percentage of converts. Percentage of converts among the people going to Syria, either going to Syria, either perpetrating terrorist attacks in Europe, in the name of Daesh, 20-25, which is a huge number. But if we look at the number of people who express on internet their intention to go, but as I said, they are blocked, so we don't know if they would have gone, what they would have done, we don't know exactly. but the number of converts is rising. 38% now in France of people expressing their intention to go to Syria, and more than 40% in the USA. So we can say now in the USA that the radicalization is less and less linked with religion, and more with something else, but what? Here is a big issue. Roughly speaking, more than 2/3 of second generation, 1/3 on converts. All young. All going, in a way to break, it's break from their parents. The big thing here is that the parents don't approve. You might think that, well, it's normal, they go to die, their parents have good reasons, not to be very happy about that. But if you compare, with, for instance, young Palestinians who go for terrorist actions, in Palestine-Israel territory, the parents may not be happy, but the parents understand why their children go for action. Which is not, interesting enough, it's true for the Palestinians, it's not true for the Arab Israelis. Because there are some young Arab Israelis who join or try to join Daesh. In this case, we have the European pattern. The parents don't understand, and oppose. So we can say there is a Western pattern, parents opposing, not only opposing, but not understanding, but why do you go to Syria? You are young, you are idealistic, you are not happy about the society, you think that there are racism, that there are exploitation, a lot of problems. But why do you go to Syria and Iraq? It's not your business, and you will not improve the situation in France, in Algeria, or in the USA by dying for jihad in Iraq. The parents don't understand. So the parents call the police, which is new, the parents call the police. The first to call, of course, are the parents of converts, because for the parents of converts, you have double incomprehension, double misunderstanding. They don't understand why their children go for jihad in Iraq, but they also don't understand why their children convert to Islam. They are at loss, totally at loss. But even the Muslim parents call the police. And we have, so one of the guy who was mastermind of the Paris attack, Abaoud, not only his father called the police, but his father now is shooting the police because the police didn't arrest his own son. But I told them, my son is crazy, my son wants to do bad things, and the police didn't care. So he's suing the police for incompetence. He might be right for other reasons, but so you see that's the main issue with Daesh. You have a local geostrategic conflict which has its rationality. You can understand why Sunni Arabs in Iraq and Syria made an insurgency against the local governments. They have, I would say, rational reasons to do that. We may not approve. We may think that there could have been another way to deal, and so, but it's normal geostrategy. But the why, tens of thousands of young people coming from the whole world would join them, that's another story. Because these guys who go to Syria and Iraq, they don't care about the geostrategy of the Middle East. They don't care about the rivalry between Iran and Saudi Arabia. They don't care about what is a good border for Iraq and Syria and so on. They go for a narrative, you know. They go for a call of duty in a real call of duty, you know. That's, it was a tweet, you know, sent by one of the guys who went there, an American guy. And he sent a tweet to his friends in America. Come, guys, here it's Call of Duty in real, you know. We do really, you know, what is in the video game. You know? So give up your computers and your stuff and come. We have real Kalashnikovs. We have real Toyota 4-wheel and so on. So, and we are the masters, you know. And we have the girls because they are allowed to take sex slaves or spouses, you know. The difference is not always very clear. But more than that.
There, it's not always very clear there.
Yeah. It's a general problem that we may have another debate on that. Yeah. And another phenomena, which is now, you know, I said there are more and more converts, but now we have more and more women joining, and young women. You know. It's on the spot we don't know exactly, but the statistics of the police, the French police and the American services, is about the same figure. You know. Almost 40% now of the volunteers. Once again, people who express their intention to go. 40% are women and girls. And here we have a fascinating dimension because these girls, you know, they will not be fighters with a Kalashnikov on a 4-wheels Toyota and so on. No. They will be with a burqa, they will stay at home, they will be married with somebody they don't necessarily know, and they will be requested to make children. It's explicit. When they go, they know. Because the parents, of course, and especially the parents of the converts, they think that their daughters have been brainwashed. That people are lying to them, promising them a good life and so and so. But if you look at the same thing, you know, Facebook, SMS, Skype discussions and so and so, the girl knows that, yes, she will live in a special building with families of foreign fighters. She will not be authorized to go outside without her husband. If she goes outside, even with her husband, she has to wear a burqa, not just a veil, you know, but a real burqa. That she, of course, it's a country which is at war, so she will not be able to make shopping and to have, you know, the kind of things you need, you can have in the West. They know, you know, and they know that the husband will die because they marry guys who volunteered to be suicide bombers. And they write it, you know, so I'm very proud. My husband is number 3 on the list of the next suicide bombers. He will go to heaven. He's a fantastic guy, and so and so. And when he dies, it happens often. They know how to do. She said, "Oh, hallelujah." No, she don't say hallelujah. She says, "Alhamdulillah." My husband is now in paradise. Next. And she's on the wedding market, matrimonial market. And the organization will provide her with a new husband. And of course, she will not choose it, you know. So we have a problem here, you know. We have a problem how to understand that tens of thousands of young Westerners, whatever, you know, their personal genealogy, volunteer to go for suicide attack, or to go for being the housewife of suicide bombers. Problem. And that's exactly here that the dangerosity of Daesh is. It's not because Daesh is trying to create an Islamic caliphate somewhere, in the desert between Damascus and Baghdad. That's something manageable. Anyway, they will not go further. The local population is suffering. That's clear. But sooner or later, that's why there was a limit of ISIS. Sooner or later, they will be defeated for two reasons. The first reason is they have reached their limits, their territorial limits. On the north, here on the north, you have the Kurds and the Turks. And the Kurds and the Turks, they know that they have nothing to expect from ISIS, so they will fight. And the Turkish government, sooner or later, will make a military intervention in Syria, I'm sure, sooner or later. On the west, the Russians decided to support Bashar al-Assad, and the Russians sent a military expedition, a military corps, with fighters, air carriers, and so and so. And they are now, protecting Bashar al-Assad, and they are winning on the field here. All these areas is now under relatively strong control of an alliance between the Russians, the Iranians, the Hezbollah, and the Bashar regime. So Daesh, ISIS will be unable, to go to the Mediterranean Sea. On the east, it's the Iraqi Shias, supported by Iran. And the Iraqi Shias, they will fight. They will fight to defend their territory. They know that they will be killed if Daesh is winning. So they are fighting, and they are fighting well. First, because they have an experience of fighting. And second, because they fight for their lives. So they will fight. The only, soft belly, if I can say that, is the south here, Jordani and Saudi Arabia. But it's mainly desert. And the Saudi, of course, will intervene, and they are already intervening, to defend, this place. So, in all the territorial limits of ISIS, ISIS has no way to go forward. No way. And the local population is less and less happy with ISIS for many reasons. One of the reasons is that everything is going to the foreign volunteers. So foreign volunteers, they have the best houses, they have the best food, they have salaries, and the local population is not happy because they say it's our country, and these people, they are getting the best of our countries. If we have hundreds of thousands or millions of refugees leaving Syria, it's precisely because nobody wants to live under ISIS. If the ISIS were popular among the Syrians, instead of going to Germany, the Syrians will flock to ISIS-controlled area. They don't, which is me. So the population is not supporting, or no more supporting, ISIS. So in this sense, ISIS is doomed. But the second dimension of ISIS is this international connection, the global reservoir of young, mainly Westerners, who are ready to die for a cause which normally should not be their cause, but they decided that it's their cause. And so for ISIS, the best way to, to try to still be on the move is to go global, is to do like Al-Qaeda, is to strike in the West. So, in this sense, the fact that ISIS is territorially limited is bad news, because the only way for them to put pressure on the West is to strike in the West. And it explains largely the Paris attacks in November. So there is a real security threat. On the other hand, these young don't represent anything except themselves. What do I mean by that? Many people think that the radicalization of young Muslims in Europe is an expression of the radicalization of the Muslim population in Europe. Not at all. As I said, the parents call the police. There is no Islamic political movement supporting Daesh or jihad anywhere in Europe. It's a real generational phenomena. We have no adults. And these young guys are not part of the local Muslim communities. They don't belong to local NGOs, they don't belong to local mosques, they don't belong to cultural associations or things like that. They are all outcasts, all people who are fighting the rest of the world, the society. And I will end on that. If we try to understand them, and I think we should try to understand, the religious dimension is not, I would say, very relevant. It's partly relevant because they revolt in the name of Islam, so it means something, But they are not, as I said, the vanguard of a Muslim population, which in fact is totally, aghast, confronted with this revolt of the youth. So, what I tried to do is instead, of trying to find a vertical dimension from where they are coming, what is their political agenda, and so, because I said it's very poor. I'm looking at the horizontal dimension. Which kind of people do the same thing that they do, but without any reference of Islam, to Islam. And here we find something which is very interesting, which is Columbine, the Columbine effect, college students coming back to their college and killing people with Kalashnikov. If we look at the structure, it's very close. All of these guys have a grant against the society. They all consider that they have not been well treated, that their brilliant personality has not been taken into consideration, that they have been bullied, ignored, despised, and so and so. They all have a revenge to take, but against the society, not against these people and that people, against the society. They all live in some sort of narrative, invent a story, create a Facebook profile. They put pictures of themselves as heroes, with weapons, So they all speak of revenge. You ignore me, but tomorrow you will know my name. You have this becoming a sudden hero, negative hero, of course, but it's the best way to make the headlines, of newspapers and TV. They all announce what they are doing, on their Facebook, not in details, but they send tweets to their friends. Look, open the TV tomorrow at 11. You'll see something, and so and so. they all kill the same way, cool blood. And then either they kill themselves or they wait for the police to kill them. They don't try to escape. It's true for the Columbine guys. It's true for the suicide bombers, the jihadi suicide bombers. They kill as many people as they can, and then, they know that anyway it's finished, I'm a hero. I will never be able to do better, and there's nothing else to do. So let's be killed. So there is a fascination for two things: suicide, clearly, and an aesthetic of violence. Daesh is very, very good at that. If you look at their journal, Dabir, but the journal exists, in millions. Their iconology, the way they use pictures, the staging, and so on. So it's all using the aesthetic of video games or of recent movies. They all love Scarface, Brian De Palma. So it's a hit. And in one of the last issue of Dabir, the story is about Noah's Ark. It's typically the idea of apocalypse. It's the end of the world, only the pure people will survive, and we are the pure people. Of course, we'll survive by going directly to heaven, so we don't need to know how to swim. But that's history. They have a very apocalyptic perception of the world. And the illustration is the poster of the film of, the Noah, who made a film, an American film, Noah or Noé? Was it? Recently. It's not a good film, but so you have an excuse not to know him. But it was 3 years ago. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They use the poster of the film. So, they use a youth culture. They manipulate the youth culture. And I would say manipulate is not a good term because it's more than manipulation. They identify with this kind of, I'm not saying that this is the youth culture, but it's sub-youth culture, if I can say that, So all the codes, the way of speaking, the way of using SMS, the way of using Facebook, the vocabulary, is totally modern, totally Western, and totally, not just in touch, but totally merged in a contemporary Western culture of violence. It has nothing to do with tradition. They don't care about tradition. They offer these young people a way to have, to play in the big movie. The last movie, of course, but the biggest movie, a movie which will be seen by everybody in the world. And that's what explains for me the attraction of Daesh for among these young volunteers.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think you have an amazing way to make understandable an extremely complex situation. So thanks a lot for that. I guess, and I'm sure that all of the students now have a much clearer idea of the phenomenon. So I will open the floor for questions right away. Don't be shy. You can actually ask questions, which is fantastic. Okay, we have a mic here. Yes, okay. So please just introduce yourself shortly, your name and maybe the year you're in, and then go.
My name is Alessandra. I am a film major. I'm a junior. Oh, and I guess I have a question about the American media. You're saying the Columbine effect. So how much to a degree would you say the American media, especially the film industry, for glorifying violence is a contributor in this? widespread joining of ISIS and Daesh?
Well, it's a problem with all the medias. They amplify. If you have no audience, you cannot become a hero. You know? So to have this, to achieve your status of this kind of word negative hero, you need the media. And they all, for instance, they call the media. The attack in Paris last year, you know, the Charlie Hebdo, and in November, in both cases, the guys called the media because they wanted to be filmed, you know, when firing or speaking and so on. So, and of course, the media come. Of course, that's their job. If you explain to a journalist that he or she has a responsibility, they all agree that they have a responsibility, but they say the first responsibility is towards the people who are listening to us. The first responsibility is to tell the truth, so we have to report. And so you have this kind of dialectic dimension. This kind of terrorism needs the media.
Another question? David? Oh, yeah. And then in the front.
Hi, my name is David Algon Jr. So I noticed you shift a lot of the blame away from religion. What do you make of claims that, for example, a lot of young Muslims are being radicalized in mosques that are trying to be shut down by certain governments? Or do you not think that it's an important component to consider when understanding their psychology?
So as I said, the religious dimension does exist. But the connection between political radicalization and religious radicalization is complex. People used to think that you have first religious radicalization, which pushes you to political radicalization. But if we look at the story, personal stories of these guys, no. It's almost never, almost, of course, it depends on that, almost never the case. No. Very few of them have been a long-time member of a mosque, of an Islamic local congregation. But when they radicalize, they take a radical Islam narrative. You know. When they radicalize, they choose a specific form of Islam, which is Salafism. So, in this sense, there is a connection. They don't take Sufi Islam, they don't take traditional Indonesian or Moroccan Islam, and so on and so on. Why? For me, it's because Salafism is, as most of the fundamentalist forms of religion, is a tool of deculturation. Salafism is, by definition, what is fundamentalism? Fundamentalism is a way of thinking that everything which did happen, everything which did happen since revelation is at best useless, and at worst pagan. You know, that the only truth is the truth of the beginning. You know, the book, the prophet, the revelation, and so on and so on. So, by definition, any fundamentalist approach to religion is anti-culture. They consider that culture is at best useless, and at worst, that culture is an obstacle, or might be an obstacle, to reach the religious truth. You know? And it's why in many fundamentalist teaching place, not only Muslim, but evangelical also, you are not allowed to read novels, to look at movies, and things like that, you know, because it's considered as, you know, more than a distraction, but a way to divert you from the truth. And that's the problem with this kind of fundamentalism, you know, specifically Salafism. It appeals to people who are uprooted, deculturated, or on the fringes. You know. It transforms what is supposed to belittle you into something which is supposed to make you greater, and especially than your parents. You know. It's why it is so attractive for second generation. Usually, there is a problem of transmission, and it's a whole story about migrant sociology. There is a problem of transmission between the first generation and the second generation, because the first generation usually they want their children, to both to stick with the family values, but also, to be fluent in the new language, English, French, etc. Okay. So there is always a discrepancy, between cultural legacy and the new citizenship, if I can say that, the new identity. And so, especially, when we are confronted with a labor migration, meaning that the first generation are people who had little education, were very often illiterate, for instance. They have no tools of transmission. And what they transmit is often, not always, but seen by the children as a bit weird, as a bit unsophisticated, so it's not attractive. But in the same time, and once again, especially when it's labor migration, meaning people who are at the bottom, of the social scale, they have a problem to adapt, to the schooling system and so on. So they are losers on both sides, on the side of the culture of the parents and on the side of the culture of the Western country. Or they feel they are losers. They are feeling of frustration. And Salafism, then you have a Salafi preacher who comes to you and will tell you, well, you don't know the culture of your parents? It's good. Because, the religion of your parents, the Islam of your parents, it's not the good Islam. You are not well integrated into Western culture? It's good. It's good. Because Western culture is not Islam and so. And now you are in a good position to have the truth. It explains largely the success of Salafi predication. You are a loser, or you consider yourself as a loser. It's more complex than that, of course. You are 20 years old, you have a problem of social recognition, and so and so. And suddenly somebody tells you that's exactly a good opportunity to become a true Muslim and to have a direct access to the truth. And all these guys, when they become Salafi, they come back to their parents and say, look, Dad, I will teach you the truth. So they reverse, they revert, the generational hierarchy. Now they have the truth. But of course, it's a truth which is not sustainable. Hence, the connection between this feeling of having the truth and a suicidal attitude for me.
If I have understood, we have to understand why a young man in the United States radicalizes to better understand why so many people radicalize in the Middle East. And I wonder if there is also a social component in this radicalization. I don't know much about the present days of youth in the United States, but here in Italy, we have 100,000 of young people that can radicalize in many political sense. And Saudi Arabia is full up of millions of undereducated, unemployed youth with no prospect. So I wonder if we would need a kind of moderation in treating this violence as a geopolitical problem. And I wonder if we are sending money or weapons or even troops in the middle of such radicalized people, and all the money and all the weapons we are sending will be used against us, I wonder. Thank you.
It's not, the problem is that the people who join Daesh are not necessarily at all among the poor, uneducated people. Not at all. No. Roughly speaking, in France, for instance, they reflect the social division of the population. And if we go to the Middle East, because of course the way a young Saudi radicalized is not necessarily the same way than a young American radicalized. It's open to debate because I have, we are discussing, between people working on that, on the differences and convergences. But the Saudis who join ISIS are middle class. They are middle class. The Jordanians who join ISIS are middle class. So it's not, a reaction of poor people against poverty, exploitation, and so, not at all. Here again, it's, I'll give you an example. One of my colleagues, Pascal Méneret, wrote a book 10 years ago on car racing in Riyadh, car racing in Saudi Arabia, And the guys, they have, it's a Camry, the Toyota Camry, okay. So, and they use, these kind of 8 lanes highways to make car racing. So these guys are not poor people, if you make car racing with a Camry Toyota, your father has the money to buy you the second Camry Toyota once you have destroyed the first one, So he wrote a book on that, And then 3 or 4 years ago, he came back to Riyadh to see where are the guys, And he found that many of them had joined, at that time, Al-Qaeda in Fallujah. So from car racing to Fallujah. You can see that it's not a matter of economic problem. It's something else. And so we can think that the motivation is closer, in fact, to the motivation of many young Westerners going there.
Okay, we have 3, 4 other questions.
Hi, my name is Anais Gomez. I'm a sophomore at NYU, and I study Middle Eastern Studies. So my question to you would be, what do you think that Western governments should do, like the counter-extremist officials do, to bridge that gap between these disenfranchised youth? Because it's an interesting question, and I wonder if maybe there's something we're doing to further alienate these populations, or what do you think is the best course of action?
Nobody knows exactly what is the best course of action, because if we knew, we would have done something. So, we did a lot of things, but necessarily the best things. First, there is a technical issue, security, intelligence, and so and so. There is a price to pay for that in terms of freedom. So there are big tensions. Patriot Act in the USA, for instance, and now we have the same kind of laws and regulation in Europe. Well, the debate on that. The second point is to understand what is the real problem. And of course, there are not one problem. One problem is the situation in the Middle East. Okay. And clearly for me, the situation in the Middle East should be managed by local people, local powers. any ground intervention would make things worse and would reinforce the narrative of Daesh, saying that we're fighting the global power. So don't send troops. No. Obama is convinced, you know, I didn't call him, but he is convinced from the beginning, and he's right. Yeah. Now, the problem is what are the local actors doing? Because none of them consider that destroying Daesh is a priority. All of them has a greater enemy than Daesh. Okay. So the Kurds for the Turks, the Iranians for the Saudis for the Iranians, and so on and so on. But sooner or later, you know, they will do something, you know, and they are, you know, in a clumsy way, but yes, they are realizing that they have to do something, you know. Okay. But it will take time. No. So now our main problem for me is not dealing with the Middle Eastern problems. President Bush tried to do that for 8 years. As I said, it was a disaster. So forget that. The problem is how to deal with the radicalization in Europe. And here, once again, you have two different views. One, which is the majority view. The problem is Islam. That's the majority view. The problem is Islam. It's Islam which is the motivation. So we have to fight not only Islamic radicalism, but Islamic fundamentalism. And there is a crackdown, you know, on the Salafi mosque and so on and so on. The problem, as I said, is that most of these guys don't really radicalize in a mosque. And they will radicalize anyway, even if we close the mosques. And the negative side effect of, you know, making a crackdown on Islam is that we create a vacuum, a spiritual and religious vacuum. For instance, jails. We know that there is many people do radicalize in jail. And in jail there is no mosque, of course. They radicalize because one of the inmates, a young guy, you know, a bit charismatic, is a radical, and he teaches the others. So for years, in France, for instance, the government refused to have Muslim chaplains in jail because they say there are already too much Islam in jail. We should not put more religion. We should have less religion in jail. But then they realize that if you do that, you leave the floor open for the radicals, because they are already in jail, because they are inmates. And a solution would be to expel the Islamic inmates. But in this case, you have to close the jail, which might be not so bad, but it's not a popular idea now. So the government decided to bring Muslim chaplains. But to do what? You know, the government said it's to de-radicalize the young guys. You know, well, if you bring, you know, a good, nice, moderate imam to a radical boy, it will not work. You know, the guys who decided to go to fight, he will not listen. So I said you have to bring imams who will deal with the spiritual needs of the inmates, but not fight radicalism. You know, he's not a policeman. We have to take into consideration spirituality and to valorize, you know, spiritual forms of religion instead of cracking on religion. And that's a big debate, especially in France, because of the French secularism, which is very, very strong and very anti-religious. And then, last point, we have to debunk the narrative of Daesh, to stop, you know, to reflect, to mirror, you know, the narrative of Daesh. So the media is a big problem with the media on that. And, but there are people who are doing that. For instance, people who are making fun of Daesh. It's risky because but especially in Great Britain. You have a lot of videos making fun of Daesh, and I think it's very good. And the videos are done by young Muslims, not by the government. There is something to do here, and one of the issues is what to do with the people who leave Daesh. Because of course, many leave. Why? Because they, at the end they don't like. So we know, and the problem is that when they leave Syria and come back to Europe, they are put in jail, which is normal, for security reasons, which is absolutely normal. But so the very tragic case, it was a young, so she was a second generation Bosnian girl in Austria. So her parents came during the war in Yugoslavia. Her parents came to Austria in the 90s, and the girl was a born-again Muslim, and 2 years ago she left Austria to join the jihad in Daesh. She was 17 years old. Okay. And what did the Austrian government? They canceled her Austrian citizenship. The problem is that these girls at the time wanted to leave and go back, and she couldn't, and she was killed by Daesh people as a traitor. So you see, there is a problem of adjustment, because to listen to the people who are coming back because they are fed up or they consider that it was a mistake. I think that their voices should be heard because they know what they are speaking about.
I'm Sidiksha, and I'm a sophomore. Hello. So you talked a lot about the recruits and their motives and ideologies, but they're merely pawns, right? So could you talk a little bit about the core, like the core administration of Daesh, and how their motives and ideologies might, and even like technological sophistication might be at a separate level to the rest?
Okay, I didn't do field work, among Daesh, so I cannot, tell you from first hand. And by the way, we have few people, who can tell you.
Who really can tell us? Because it's a big problem as well. Because we don't. I mean, we're receiving a lot of information, but as researchers, we know that there are not a lot of people doing field work in Daesh, apart from maybe the one who's coming back. So how this kind of information is reliable, but yeah.
Yeah, we have information through defectors and through intelligence, interceptions of communications and so on and so. What we know is that Daesh has a different system in Iraq and in Syria. In Iraq, Daesh is more at home, and the local administrators of Daesh are local people, mainly, Sunni Arabs belonging to local tribes. And the tribal dimension is very strong in Iraq. And they use, tribal ways of dealing with feuds. For instance, collective revenge. So some tribes are with Daesh because the enemy tribe is with the government and the reverse. So the tribal dimension is wrong. So in Iraq, Daesh is still, I would say, connected to the local sociology. In Syria, it seems that it's quite different. That the foreign fighters have a bigger role in local administration. That they interfere directly with the daily life of the people. Secondly, we know that Daesh has a very tough court system, justice system, but that Daesh is not really, administrating, managing at the micro level. Thirdly, we know that Daesh was able to deliver the goods until recently because they had money. Yeah. So Daesh was able to provide food, oil, gas, and so on and so. And apparently, it's no more the case. They have been struck, at this level, So it's more and more difficult, and the economic and social situation is worse. And then we have very contradictory testimonies of people coming from the same town. Some tell you, well, it's peace, it works, we have electricity, and so. And some other people coming from the same town tell you, no, there is only 2 hours electricity a day. There is a problem to find food, and so and so. So it's, and of course, everybody with all the defectors have their own agenda. So you have to make, to screen, to vet the people who come back. Including, I would say, many of our colleagues, researchers, because we have a lot of colleagues who have a local origin. It's clear about my colleagues, the ones who are Shias don't see the situation exactly the same way than the ones who are Sunnis, which is normal, So we always have to adjust, It's not a matter of objectivity, it's just that you cannot have you have necessarily a point of view. You cannot just make an objective study of facts. The situation is too fluid and too dangerous.
Hi, I'm Katie. I'm a sophomore majoring in politics. My question is, do you think it's more important for the US to continue condemning Syrian President Assad for using chemical weapons, or should they kind of let that go and join together to really strengthen the fight against ISIS?
I think that Assad is part of the problem and will never part of the solution. Right? He's not head of state. He's a chief of gang. And he didn't show any inclination to become a real head of state. So the problem is, I would say it's not Bashar himself. It's what do we do with the Alawi, with the group he's representing. And who could speak for all Syria, or not speak for all Syria, but who could be acceptable for everybody. And now, no, nobody. So what we are going towards is kind of, I would say, regionalization, But in a sense, thanks to the Russians, to the Rus policy of the Russians, the fragmentation of the country is less, because now the Russians attack make the consequences is that in some weeks or months we'll have only 3 parts. The west part under the Alawi, the regime, the northern part under the Kurds, and this part under Daesh. And this will be the time of the choice. Bashar has announced that he will attack Daesh. Good luck. But it means that he has absolutely no intention to negotiate with anybody. He thinks that the tide has been reversed, that now with the Russian support he will be able to conquer against the country, that the Americans and the Europeans will do nothing, then the Turks will do nothing, and so on. Well, the Turks are now massing troops on the border. The Saudis sent troops to Turkey to fight alongside the Turks, but to fight against whom? The Kurds, Daesh, the regime. So the problem is that this kind of situation, you can find a solution only when most of the actors come to the realization that they cannot win. But if one of them thinks that he can win, he will not negotiate. No. And now it's clear that Bashar thinks that, his hour has come back, and that he can win. I think we have another round, but the so-called moderate opposition is apparently destroyed. So we have three actors, and the three actors which fight each other, which is not a good omen for the stability of Syria.
We're going to take a last question. Yeah, so a last question, please, Valeria.
Is it working? What would you think if relocalizing the conflict would be a solution of this? Because you said that Daesh cannot expand because it has reached its natural borders, so it's putting pressure with terrorist acts abroad, creating this kind of revolutionary countercultural movements fed with this kind of juvenile narcissism in a way. But if the idea of negotiating with Daesh and thinking that it could be a state in the end, wouldn't that bring about some sort of a solution so that all these tentacles outside would see a focus on the land within some borders rather than fighting in other places?
If we consider that there are two trends among the founders of Daesh, the local Sunni people, Iraqi and Syrians on the one hand, and people who are coming from Al-Qaeda on the other hand. It's clear that the people coming from Al-Qaeda, so the jihadists, have absolutely no interest in having a local state with borders. They are global. They will lose the foreign fighters. The foreign fighters will not be interested, to become custom officers of a new territorial state. But the first category, yes, might be interested, especially the tribes, because for the tribes, it's their territory, it's their land, and they don't care about, attacks on Paris and New York. So it's very probable that inside Daesh there are conflicts, or at least divergence of views, between the people who would be ready to either to carve, to find a territorial settlement, and people who will not. So it's why I think sooner or later Daesh will split. But that said, once you consider that the people who have when you have territorial claims, you can negotiate. There's something to negotiate. It doesn't work necessarily. See Palestine and Israel, but at least you know what you are fighting or negotiating about: land, territory. Okay. So there are two solutions. One is to restore the border between Iraq and Syria, and to have the Sunnis reintegrated in Iraqi political life, and the Sunnis taking the power in Damascus, because they have the majority. But the Russians, the Iranians, and Bashar al-Assad will never let Sunnis take power in Damascus. So the only solution that could satisfy the local population is to create a new state, Sunni Arabistan. And who knows? Who knows? We have examples of new states in the world. The Turks might be happy with that because it will limit the power of the Kurds. The Iranians, in fact, if they have the two capitals, Damascus, if their allies have the two capitals, Damascus and Baghdad, they might agree to have, you know, Sunni Arabs managing a piece of desert. No? So if there is a solution, yes, if there is something to negotiate, it's that, but it's too early.
Thank you so much. Thank you.